All right. Karl, can you state your full name, please?
Karl Henry Stenzel.
Karl Henry Stenzel. All right. And so you're from, how do you pronounce this town?
Bruchsal.
Oh, Brussels.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can pronounce it. That's great.
Well, Bruch is Bruch.
Oh.
And Saal.
Yep. Okay. Um,
I was born in Karlsruhe,
okay.
which is the capital of Baden, the state of Baden,
Mm-hmm.
which runs from Heidelberg all the way down to the Swiss border.
Okay. So southern Germany,
Yeah,
Germany along the Rhine.
yeah.
How far were you from Munich?
From Munich, I would guesstimate 200 kilometers.
Okay. And so what year were you born?
1931,
Okay.
November the 1st.
November the 1st. So 2 years before the Nazis took over Germany.
Yes. Now, here is the other part of the story. My parents had emigrated to America. I was conceived in Stratford, Connecticut. But my mother didn't like it so much in America. And she decided that whatever child it was that she was going to have would be born in Germany. And indeed, in her 9th month, my mother boarded a ship, went back home to Germany to her parents, and the day after she arrived there, I arrived.
Wow.
After 2 or 3 months, my father implored my mother, come back to me in America. And she did, together with me. And for a time we lived in Stratford, Connecticut. And my father had 3 brothers who had all emigrated to America. One ended up in New York. He was by profession and education a butcher. And he worked for a German company in New York City that produced very fine wurst, sausages of German type. And another brother, he was by trade a tailor. He ended up in Iowa, in Cedar Rapids. And the third brother, he was a farmer, and he ended up with a farm in Illinois. Now, in 1934, my mother had the opportunity to go back to Germany. Her mother became very ill, and she said to my father, my dear, I'm going back to my parents. I have to be there. My mother is very, very ill. And she did. And of course, she took me with her. And it was about 6 months later, I understand, she wrote to my father and said, "My dear Ernst," his name was Ernst, "if you want to be married to me, you come back to Germany. I'm not going back to USA." And my father did. And initially, he worked for the police department in Karlsruhe. And then he had the opportunity to manage or own a PX in a new army post in 1936, which was located in Bruchsal. And he was accepted, he took it over, and this was a good business. It was young troops, it was a cavalry unit there, and everything was lovely until 1939, when World War II broke out.
Yes. And Karl, do you remember those early days, those pre-war days in Germany?
Yes, I do.
And were you a part of the Hitler Youth? And what was it like back then under the Nazi regime? Do you remember anything specific about the Nazi regime?
Yes. One thing was, there's the Hitler Youth and there's the Jungvolk. The Jungvolk were the younger boys, not Hitler Youth age yet. You were transferred to Hitler Youth at age 15. And at age 8, 9 was more age 9. I was going to elementary school, and which was downtown Bruchsal, in a 3-story building. And one day, all of a sudden, 2 Hitler Youth boys burst into the classroom without asking anything and yelled, "Heil Hitler! We are here to induct your boys in this class into the Jungvolk. We have forms here that need to be filled out by their parents, and we will be back tomorrow to collect the forms that are signed by their parents. Heil Hitler!" And out they went. We took the forms back home. My parents looked at them and said, "It's okay, yeah. You kind of have to."
Yeah, you had to.
And thereby, a week later, we were officially inducted. We were informed what uniforms to buy, which were primarily shorts that were black, brown shirt, a belt, and a tie that was held together on top by a leather strap thing. It kind of made you feel a little important. And we had meetings. And I think that was twice a month or 3 times a month. And it was for the purpose of teaching us how to march, the proper salute.
So training you to be soldiers, mini soldiers.
Yes. Which for a young boy
Yeah, it's fun.
was kind of interesting. Plus, we had to learn to box. We had to learn to fight a bit. And we were getting some political indoctrination.
Mm-hmm.
How wonderful our Führer, our leader,
Wow.
was. There was also a kindergarten at that time, and I later learned that they even taught the little children to pray. But the prayer was a little bit different.
Do you remember it?
Yes. It was fold your hands and bow your little heads. Always think of Adolf Hitler, who gives us all our food and helps us out of all difficulty. Amen. Isn't that nice?
Wow. So, do you remember kind of the swastikas hanging from buildings where there are a lot of
Yes.
flags? Did you ever see, the brown shirts, the SA marching in the streets? Did you ever see that, or was your village smaller?
No, Uppsala was too small. That wasn't going on there. That was in Berlin and big cities. There was the 1936 Olympics, which was in Berlin, and Hitler took maximum advantage of that. He also refused to shake hands with the American who won, I think it was the foot race.
Yep.
Now I should remember the guy's name.
It's slipping my mind too, but he was an African American.
Yeah.
And Hitler refused to shake
And
his
Hitler
hand.
refused to shake hands with him.
Wow. What did your parents, do you remember what your parents thought about Hitler in the early years? Did you remember at that time what they thought about him?
Well, they ran this PX on the army post, which was a good business, as I said, because it was all new recruits for this cavalry unit. They couldn't go into town. Everything they needed, they had to buy from us. So that was great.
Yeah.
I have some pictures in an old album of where this was and where we lived, the building. And if we can take a couple of minutes, I can pull out the album.
Yeah, we can do it now or we can do it after. It doesn't matter. Whatever you prefer. If you want to do it now, that's okay.
Whichever.
So you were a part of you said Hitler Jugend?
Sure. Right behind our building, The building that we were in was the mess hall, the officers' club on the second floor, and our apartment was on the first and second floor, and the PX was in both places. Because downstairs was the mess hall, upstairs was a day room where they could meet or play ping pong or billiards and what have you. In our store, we have beer on tap. We made sandwiches for snacks. We had soft drinks, writing material, anything a soldier might need. But then in 1939, it's a bit of an anecdote too, my mother and I were on vacation in the Black Forest in a very small town called Badenweiler. We stayed there in a little country hotel, which was nice. One evening, dinner was served. It was very nice. The dessert came, which was a vanilla pudding served in a wine goblet with a red cherry on top. I remember those details. And just at that moment, a radio message played saying, "We are at war. We have been attacked by Poland, and our valiant troops are fighting back." And that was the beginning of World War II. At that moment, my mother had told me before of World War I, when she was a young girl, there was an incident. They lived in Karlsruhe, that a French airplane came over, and there was a circus in town, big circus tent. And that plane dropped a bomb on that circus tent. And 200 children were killed. And that made a heck of an impression on me. And that picture just came to my mind as this message came that we are at war. And to me, it meant bad things were gonna happen now. My mother, I started crying. And my mother, she tried to comfort me. And she said, "We're gonna have to cut short our vacation. Dad is gonna come tomorrow and pick us up." And that's what happened. We went back home. And the troops that were in that facility, they were called to the front immediately. So all the horses and all the men left. And it was kind of vacant for a month or two. And then a military hospital was created of that facility. A military post is called a Kaserne. And the Kaserne can be in any city. But it's strictly fenced in, various buildings, and it's strictly military. Again, for a young boy, kind of interesting to watch the training of the troops. They let me go in the stables and be with the horses. They taught me how to brush a horse. That had to be done daily. I could feed him a little sugar. It was fun. And that, of course, ceased when they were activated and went to the front. I have no idea what happened to any of them. Also, what happened is the second day after the declaration of war, my father was called back into service. He had served in World War I, had been injured, and he was on record of having served. And he was called back in the second day after the declaration of war. And now the business hung all on my mother, which was pretty tough. It led eventually to her having somewhat of a nervous breakdown. We got somebody else to sublet the business to. They did a miserable job. We had to take it back over about a year later. And my mother had recovered. She had learned a good bit of how to run a business. And we continued.
Yeah. So
my father initially was sent to Prague in the Czech Republic. And in Prague, he saw some items like that vase that's on the table, purple crystal. He bought it, brought it home to his wife. And also that clear one that's on top of the piece of furniture there.
Mm-hmm. So those are from Prague, those pieces?
Yeah. And so life continued.
Yeah, and can I go back and ask about your dad in World War I? Did he serve in the trenches? Was he in the infantry? Do you know what he did in World War I?
Yes, he was an infantry soldier. And he was injured by shrapnel, which had hit him in the side here. and there was a piece of shrapnel in his body yet, which kept sort of wandering around. It was never taken out. I don't know why.
Wow. So, do you know the infantry, the regiment he served in World War II? Do you remember what that was, or maybe that's just...
No, after he was taken back in, he was put into the Ordnance Corps, which is the part of the military that controls weapons, munitions, and food. And he was particularly involved with the food business. To store it and to
distribute.
Give it out to various units according to the number of men here and there. And so he was not involved in any frontline duty. After being in Prague, his next assignment was in Alsace, just on the other side of the Rhine River, in the small city of Hagenau. And I have a memory there. He was boarded with a doctor's family, and in a very nice home. And that doctor's family invited my mother and I to come for a week's vacation. And they had two children, a boy and a girl of approximately my age. And I had a great time with them. And we went one day to Strasbourg to a very fine restaurant. And that was a nice experience. And to my amazement, and the food market in Alsace, I saw oranges. I saw lemons. And since 1939, we saw none of that on the German side.
Wow. Well, so the war starts and you're still in the same town, you know, helping out at the PX.
Yeah.
And, you know, what, I'm guessing you were too young to be called up to serve.
Well, at the very end, they took in boys age 14 and 15. And I was late. I was 14 at that point, but I was lucky I was never called.
I was very lucky.
Yeah.
So did you experience much bombing in your town and around your town later on in the war? Did you see many U.S. airplanes bombing cities and areas?
Yes. There was bombing of larger cities, starting around 1943. In 44, we had a few incidents, which turned into daily incidents of a small group of fighter bombers coming across the town. But we learned very quickly they were not after us. What they were doing is to fly along the railroad lines and the Autobahn to interrupt transport. Because transport meant munitions being moved, soldiers being moved, whatever. And that was to be destroyed. But I knew quickly, a few days, that they were not after us.
Yes.
So I'd go out in the back of the building where the parade ground was, and I'd stand out there and watch them, flying around and doing their thing.
Yeah. So there
Once
is...
in a while, they can see something funny. One day was in the afternoon. A horse that was tied up outside the stable broke loose. And one of the pilots, he must have been a Texan, saw that horse and flew towards him. And the horse ran to the opposite side of the parade ground. He turned his plane around and chased him the other way. And he did this for about a half an hour. He kept chasing that horse back and forth, firing a few rounds, not hurting the horse, except running him.
Wow. So it's very interesting, Karl. There's a U.S. Veteran who's a pilot, and he lives in Hendersonville, and he's 100 years old, and he flew P-47s in southern Germany near the end of the war. So that's pretty interesting. You know, he's 100 years old, and he's one of my good friends, and he flew P-47s. Maybe you saw him.
It's very possible.
It's very possible.
Very possible.
So
then on the 1st of March, 1945, Bruchsal had a major bombing attack. It was by 86 American 4-engine bombers. It occurred on the 1st of March around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a bright sunny day, and those 86 bombers flew 3 sorties over the town and unloaded. And it destroyed the inner part of the town totally, and 80% of the town was pretty much destroyed. Exactly a month later, the 1st of April, our town was captured by the French Free Army, which had been formed under General
General de Gaulle.
De Gaulle, that was him.
Wow. Do you remember the French troops coming into the area?
Very much.
Was there any fighting? Were any Germans behind to defend the town, or did they just run?
Very little. There was a company of Indian soldiers that fought on the German side, who were there for our defense. but they didn't offer very much of a defense. In front of our house, a tank ended up there, and it had no more fuel to move.
A German tank.
Yeah, so it just sat there. And it was kind of like the last German soldiers left in the morning, and in the afternoon the French guys came in. Fortunately, my mother's French was pretty good. Her grandfather had been a World War I French officer who was eventually married to her grandmother. And in their home, she was only allowed to speak French. So she learned as a young girl. And that was helpful. We quickly realized that the soldiers are soldiers the world over. And rape can be a popular sport, and particularly when the guys get drunk. So, my mother, pretty smart woman, we had a pretty good amount of wine, cognac, all sorts of drinkable goods in storage in our basement for the PX originally. But we had a good inventory left. And when my mother saw these guys wandering around looking what they could get and what have you, she took a case of wine and put it next to our front door. And when some soldiers came, she just took 2 bottles and gave each guy 2 bottles and said, "Au revoir, goodbye, go somewhere else, don't stay here." And that worked. And very shortly thereafter, the French troops utilized our campus as a medical facility. And several of the doctors were quartered in our apartment. They kicked us out of our bedrooms. We slept on the floor in the hallway, and the French doctors occupied our bedrooms, and including a French general, and I remember his name, was General Latre de Tassigny, and his girlfriend occupied my parents' bedroom. We were required to cook for these gentlemen. They supplied us with 2 Moroccan soldiers, Algerian soldiers, to help in the kitchen. And they supplied us with the food that we were to cook, including large quantities of olive oil, because they insisted that French fries should be made in olive oil. and they were truly delicious.
I bet. Wow.
The other fortunate aspect was, while the rest of the town was near starving, we were allowed to eat the food that was left over from the doctor's dining table, which was wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the guys went out hunting and came back with a couple of rabbits. So we cooked a nice rabbit stew, and that was good. And we were lucky.
Now, where was your dad during this?
During these last couple of months, well, for the last year, it may have been 2 years, his depot of food storage was in Karlsruhe, 25 kilometers away. So on weekends, my father could drive home and take care of the books, and that was very helpful, especially to my mother. And then at the very end, like after Bruchsal was destroyed, he couldn't come up anymore. And from what he told us later on, is that around the end of March, they could see the advance of the American troops and French troops. He and a couple of other officers in their unit made the decision that all was lost. Let us save ourselves.
Yeah.
And they took off and headed for the Swiss border down by the Lake of Constance. They got rid of their uniforms, got some civilian clothes, and pretended to be just plain civilians. And they got the places to stay from some of the local people and stayed there until things had settled pretty much. In June of 45, the borders between the French zone and the American zone were changed according to the agreement of Yalta, and Bruchsal and Karlsruhe became part of the American zone, which we appreciated very much. The French were pretty tough and not very nice, because after all, German troops had not been nice in France. American troops generally were much kinder, and of course, America had loads of food, some of which was given to us starving Germans. Some funny things happened. There were tons of cornmeal that were shipped to Germany. and it was distributed to German bakers. Now, German bakers had never had any cornmeal. They didn't know really what to do with it. But they said, let's try. And they tried to make loaves of bread like rye bread, only to discover that the day after it would start to break apart. You couldn't make a loaf of bread out of it. Mm-hmm. So all the cornmeal was shipped back.
Yeah. Wow. So when Hitler killed himself, did you hear a radio broadcast about that? Was that communicated to you guys as civilians?
When the attempt was made, yes, that was published immediately. And of course, it got twisted around to be in favor of Hitler, since he was not injured. They said, oh, God is with Germany. He protected Hitler.
Wow.
And my mother and I, we were on a week's vacation in a small town of Gengenbach. And in the morning after breakfast, we took a little walk through a park, and we got a newspaper, and there the headline was, "Attempt on Hitler's life did not succeed." And blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Of course, it was not immediately reported that Hitler had married the last day and that they both committed suicide. That was reported at least a month or two later. But in general, there was great joy and relief when on May 8th, the war was over.
Yeah. And from what I've read, Goebbels, the propaganda minister, did a really good job at hiding the fact that Germany was losing the war. Did you see it as a civilian? Did you see that Germany was losing the war, even though the German radio and newspapers would say otherwise?
No, I don't think we had a newspaper at that time. But somehow the message did come across that Admiral Dönitz represented Germany in the last discussion with the Allies. And Dönitz sure tried to continue the war and to get the Western powers involved in continuing the war against Russia. That the discussion didn't succeed.
Wow.
And then all the problems came between the Allies in Berlin, and then East and West Germany.
Yeah. Do you remember a lot of interactions with American troops, U.S. troops? Did you interact with them? Yeah, I know you said they were pretty nice.
Yes. No, for the most part, they were good guys. Especially with us kids. They introduced to chewing gum, which was something interesting. And they were generally free with little chocolate bars or candy. That was good.
Yeah. So after the war, obviously rebuilding your town, your hometown, but what did life look like for you after the war?
That came very slowly. My school was totally destroyed. For a year, we didn't have school. And then finally, there was what is it called? The Catholic a convent for men.
Yes.
It has a different name. There was one of those in Bruxelles, which had been financed by the American Catholic Church. Was a 4-story building, and it was not fully occupied at the time. And my school got the 4th floor in the building to open business again for school. That was about 12 months after the war stopped. And I was in high school at that point. And
would you like me to get your water?
Much discussion was going on at that point. What is the future for Germany? What is going to happen? How long will it take to rebuild? And much of the consensus was, oh God, it's gonna be at least 50 years to restore it, the country. Thankfully, in many ways, that was completely wrong, because it did not take into account what the Marshall Plan was going to do. And it, to a large extent, restored Germany. My hometown was rebuilt, actually, by the early 1960s, which was very quick. And the pictures in that book are from the early 60s.
So what did you do after the war, after you graduated high school?
What I did, well, My parents opened a paper and candy store in the old military facility, which some of the buildings have been converted into classrooms for elementary school, for a trade school, and to have that kind of a business with the schools surrounding was a good deal. And my father had the good idea to add ice cream to that business. And he found the company that made ice cream machines. And he bought one. We tried it. It wasn't very efficient. And he sent it back. And he got another one. And that one was much better. So here we were in ice cream business. And the guy who got stuck with the ice cream counter was yours truly, which was fine with me because I enjoyed the ice cream too.
And I bet you got to meet some females, some ladies too.
Certainly, most of our customers were school kids and some of the teachers. And funny things that happen. My father, he was looking at the part of the business of cigarettes and cigars and men's things. And we had very few of the men teachers coming into the store, and kind of wondered why. Well, Buchsal is strongly Catholic. There are 5 Catholic churches, big ones, and 1 Lutheran church. My mother said, you know what? I think you better go to church on Sunday. And she bought him the prayer chain that they use. A hymnal, Catholic one. And she said, you go Sunday morning. Karl and I, we were going to go to the Lutheran church. That's where we belonged. And son of a gun, it was amazing. The first Sunday my father was in church, by mid-week, all kinds of teachers showed up. What kind of cigars do you have? And this, that, and the other thing.
Wow.
Oh, we saw you in church last Sunday. Ah.
So he started going regularly to that church, is that right?
Yes. And he continued until the end of his life.
When did your parents pass away? How old were you?
My mother died at age 62.
Mhm.
She had several strokes, and the last one kind of killed her. My father, he died from lung cancer. He was a heavy smoker, and he died at age 77.
So what did you do after the war? So obviously you worked in the shop, in your parents' shop. When
Yeah.
did you come to the United States?
Well, in all of our discussions what the future was in Germany, my parents, especially my father, as soon as it was possible, he took up contact with his brothers in America, and they helped us greatly by sending food packages and what have you. And we talked about it a lot. Wouldn't your future be better in America than here? And I seen from the American soldiers how they lived, what they had, what they ate. Life in America must be better than here. And you learn more about it. There came a time in 1946, 47, where the American troops had a German youth activities program to tell us young people about American culture, which was a good thing. In Germany, there was a YMCA, which had been deactivated during Hitler. It began to be a bit reorganized. The letters for that are different. It is the CVJM, which put into words is Christlicher Verein Junger Männer, Christian Association of Young Men. And it does not have Let It Ring.
That's all right.
Oh. Hello. Thank you. Message from the Cascade Management. The pool is open again.
So you joined the American Youth Association for
Well, it was the German one.
the German one, okay.
And the way it was organized is strictly as a Bible study. And it was conducted by a gentleman by the name of Makamul, Mr. Makamul. He got a a group of boys together, and we would meet once a week in the evening in a room in the basement of the local hospital. And we would have a Bible study, which was a good thing to do. And we tried to have some mission work with prisoners. We had a large prison in Buchsel for thieves, murderers, and everything else.
Wow.
And we tried to visit in there and bring the guys to Christ. And Christmas came, and an American pastor found out about our little club, and he offered to come with us to the prison at Christmas time. And he said, I'll supply the cookies, and we can give them all a little package. And he did not speak German very well at all, but there was a hymn, a Christmas hymn in German that starts out, "From heaven on high, I come and bring good news to you." And it goes on and on. And the pastor apparently thought that would be a good thing for him to say. So he stood up in front of all the prisoners and said, from heaven high, I'm coming to you. And then he continued in German, very broken German, for the rest. And with all of that, those prisoners, who some were very hardened prisoners, a lot of them sat there and cried, which was really heartwarming thing to see. And this pastor invited me to go with him to his family in Stuttgart for a lunch. And I thought, wow, a real American lunch, that's got to be great. And I drove with him. He had a cheap station wagon, which was kind of exciting to ride in that. And he had a very nice wife. And she served us lunch, a sandwich, and forget what to drink. Was probably mineral water. And all I know is I was still hungry after that lunch. It was very small. I had expected something grand, and it wasn't. I said, okay. But the American YMCA helped us with summer camps and by providing tents. Effectively, they really came from the American Army, the tents, but food supplies and what have you. Speaking of food supplies, I went to summer camp in 46 or 47 in that city, which is Rothenburg. And outside the city, we had our campground. And the first day we arrived there, we were given a 1 pound can of butter for each tent. 10 kids to the tent. And that was supposed to be the butter to be used for breakfast, to put on bread in the mornings. What did we do? At least in my tent. We said, we're not waiting. We're gonna open that can of butter. And we each took a soup spoon and took a soup spoon of butter and ate it right then and there, because we were starved for fat.
Wow. So how did you end up getting to the United States?
Well, I applied for a visa with the American consulate in Stuttgart and had to fill out all sorts of papers and who was sponsoring me. Well, my father spoke with his brother August, who is the butcher by trade. And at that point, he had bought a delicatessen store in White Plains, New York. And he was the one who is most successful. And he had the funds to sponsor me in case I got sick or didn't work. That he could take care of me. And he had to submit all kinds of documents of his financial status and what have you. And in all, it took 2 years then before I finally got my visa to leave Germany and come to the States.
Wow. What year was that?
1950. I first applied in 48 and got the visa in 50. And then my father hunted around for transportation. Tried American ships, British ships, French ships. There was one German ship still going across the Atlantic. All of them were packed full. Finally, through American Express, he contacted an Italian ship, and son of a gun, they had a space for me. So I traveled by train from Bruxelles to Genoa, Italy. My father went with me up to the Swiss border And then he could not go any further. He had to turn around and go back home. And we said goodbye. And I continued on through the night, through Switzerland. I saw nothing of it. And in the morning, we arrived in Genoa around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. I was supposed to have a room at a hotel near the docks. The hotel was there. It was a small one. They had no room for me. Said, so what are we gonna do? Huh? And the hotel owner said, well, there is a family in room so-and-so, and there is a bathtub. I think we can put some blankets and a pillow into the bathtub, and you can sleep in there. That's what happened. 2 days later, we could board ship. It was the Vulcania, was the name of the ship. And the people from the Genoa area boarded, and the family that I was sleeping with were nice people. And I left the bathroom for them to use the bathroom in the mornings. And we got our places on board ship, and the following day pulled up the anchor and left. But we had to make a stop in Naples to take some more passengers. We did. The following day, we had to make a stop in Palermo, Sicily. Not to take on so many passengers, was very few, but we loaded loads of tomatoes and garlic. And someone made the decision in their wisdom to load all the garlic in the front hold of the ship and the tomatoes in the back. Guess what? All the way across the Atlantic, in the entire ship, you smelled nothing but garlic. Oh. But we made it across, arrived in New York City. The ship was boarded by officials from Immigration and Naturalization, and we all had to appear in front of them with our papers, and they'd look us up in their papers if we were legitimate. And the ship pulled up into its proper dock and got anchored. And slowly we were released. My Uncle August was there. He stood on the dock waiting for me to get off. We hugged and said hello, so good to see you. And we got my luggage together, loaded into his car, and it was about lunchtime at that point. He said, I'm going to go across the street and get a couple of sandwiches. He came back. They were ham sandwiches. And to me, it was a fine sandwich. But my uncle was very disappointed. It was more expensive than what he charged for his ham sandwich in his store, and it was with half the ham on it that he gives. So he was talking about that. And on our way to White Plains, which is about 40-minute trip, he said, now, Karl, what's your intention here anyway? Are you here for a visit for a month or so? Or maybe would you like to stay a little longer, maybe 4 or 6 months? Or is your intention to become an American citizen eventually? I said, I want to be an American. He says, oh, well, now I have news for you. He said, in this country, we speak English. And as of right now, I don't want to hear another word of German out of your mouth. That's pretty tough. Even after 2 years of English in high school in Germany, which is quite different English, the British English. But you do what you can. And what you cannot do, you cannot do. That's it. And you discover very quickly, you cannot tell jokes that were hilarious in Germany, try to translate it into English. It didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You cannot translate jokes. That's one thing. And we used to have great fun trading jokes.
Yeah. So you lived in New York. You said Long Island. Is that correct?
Yep.
And did you work in his butcher shop?
It's a delicatessen store where they make sandwiches, potato salad, coleslaw, bread pudding, all these things. During the summer, and this is August now. I arrived August the 5th, and it's hot. More hot than I was used to in Germany. And most days, we had to produce 200 pounds of potato salad. They were broiled, and then they had to be peeled. And to do a good peeling and not destroy the potato, it has to be done when they're hot. And that's a tough thing to do. To handle the potato and not burn your fingers and peel the doggone thing. And after you peel it, it has to be sliced, and then the dressing made. It's a job. My aunt worked with that too. And I don't know, remember if it was every day or every week. He had a 20-pound roast beef that they cooked. And then it was put in the store to be sliced for making roast beef sandwiches.
Wow.
And they were very good. But I was helping out in the store, and my uncle's idea was that I could become a real delicatessen man, and we could open another store, and maybe a third one, and build a little empire. Well, after a month or so, we discovered Karl doesn't want to be a delicatessen man. It's not my thing. So he said, look, let me get you another job. Well, foolishly, in a way, he got me a job with a diner, which some people at the time called it the lunch wagon. Usually it was an old train car converted into a lunch restaurant. The one that he put me with was Fritz's Diner on Post Road. Fritz, of course, was German. And he took me, and he says, you can help us washing dishes, and you can learn to become a short order cook, and to make hamburgers and fry eggs and what have you. Okay. Across the street from his diner was a Packard automobile dealership. I was very much interested in that. My interest was automobiles and trucks. And next door to the diner was that Packard dealership's used car lot. And Fritz saw me frequently looking out the window at that used car lot. And after a month, Fritz decided I was not what he was looking for in his business. So he fired me on Saturday. I'm embarrassed. I don't want to tell my uncle that I got fired. What am I going to do? Well, I picked up a newspaper and started studying the help wanted part. I found 3 factory jobs, no experience required. I said, well, that might be me. I have no experience. So the following morning, I got dressed, put on a good pair of slacks, a starched dress shirt with a tie, and a jacket. sport jack. It was kind of the wrong attire for a guy looking for a job with no experience required in the factory. But I went anyway, and they gave me a form to fill out, and I gave the form back, and they would say, "Don't call us, we'll call you." And I had learned already that meant, "Don't bother us, and we probably will not call you." So I said, okay. There was another job in the newspaper, which was for a man to change tires for the General Tire dealership in White Plains. I said, well, tires, automobiles, trucks, that sounds more like me. So I went, presented myself to the boss there, and he said, well, do you have any experience? I said, well, it's kind of limited. I had a bicycle in Germany. Sometimes I got a flat, and I had to take it apart, fixed it, mount it back on. He says, well, car tires and truck tires are quite different from bicycle tires. It's a different thing. I said, yes, but I can learn. He says, okay. He looked me up and down and he said, now look, at this kind of work, you're gonna get dirty. Well, I have been told in America you have to be forward. You have to be somewhat aggressive, not laid back. So I said, well, sir, do you have running water? He said, yes. And I said, might you have also a little soap? He said, yes. Why? I said, well, if I get too dirty before I go home, I can wash myself. He looked and he said, son, you're hired. And I went to work there. I liked what I was doing, getting acquainted with various vehicles. And then at that time, he also opened a retread shop next to his existing business. Now, that was another aspect, retreading. I learned about that. And I also learned that it's a very hot job because the molds in there, they run a pretty high heat. And he finally, we have been together for not quite 2 years. He says, let's try you out in sales. How about calling on people with trucks to see if you can sell them General Tires? I said, sure, I'll try that. I did. I hadn't sold very much, but I tried. When I got a postcard in the mail, your friends and neighbors have decided that you should join the U.S. Army. That's the way it was worded in those days. And indeed, within 30 days of arrival in the United States, I was required to register for the draft. And sure enough, there it was. I had to present myself in Manhattan at a certain time and date for examination, physical and otherwise, and did that and was told to be at Fort, what was it, in New Jersey for induction.
And what year is this?
1950. At 52.
So right in the middle of the Korean War?
Yeah. And I was inducted. I was put in uniform. And now came all the examinations, physical as well as mental, and my background. Near Hitler Youth, huh? You've had some military training. I said, somewhat, yes. And I lived on a military post, so I know a bit what it's about. Interesting, yeah, okay. Get done with all the testing, and they came with the message, well, Private Stenzel, you have been very successful so far. I think you are a candidate for officers' candidate school. Would you be interested? I said, well, yes, I would. It might be a career. Okay. Well, we'll notify you shortly. I forget how long it was after that conversation, if it was a couple of weeks or what. I was called into personnel, and Private Stenzel, you were interested in officers' candidate school? I said yes. Well, unfortunately, you do not qualify. Oh, I don't? Why not? Well, you're not a citizen. I said, yeah, I know that. But what's the difference? Well, to become an officer, you have to be a citizen of the United States. I said, really? That's interesting. I'm not a citizen, but you can force me to join your army. You can send me overseas. You perhaps can get me killed. but I cannot be an officer and a gentleman by the act of Congress. Well, that's the law, and nothing we can do about that. That's the way it is. You need to be here 5 years before you can earn citizenship. And after that, you can go to officers candidate school, no problem. I said, okay, let that be. So, indeed, I ended up in Korea for 14 months. Part of it on the front line the first couple of months. But one night we were under attack by the Chinese, and my squad leader said, "Hey, Stenzel, run down to the bunker and get a box of hand grenades." I did. I ran back through the trench, and halfway back, I all of a sudden had a sharp pain in my knee, and I fell down, and that box of hand grenades was laying on my chest, and all I could think about was, oh my God, if a pin fell out of one of them, I'm gone. And I was yelling for help. Well, thank God none of them fell out. And in the morning, they took me to a first aid station, and they looked at my knees, but they didn't have any x-ray equipment. So they decided to put me on a train back to Seoul into a hospital. And for the first time after, 2 or 3 months, there was a bed with white linen on it. Oh, and that felt so wonderful.
So you were on the front lines for a few months in Korea.
Yeah.
And so you were private in an infantry? Were you in an infantry regiment?
Yeah.
Okay. What type of gun did you carry? Did you carry an M1 Grand?
M1.
M1?
Yeah.
Okay.
Carbines were strictly for officers, strangely. And there was a heavier rifle, a BAR, that was for one particular man in the squad. But everybody else had an M1. Which frankly was pretty much a useless weapon in the kind of war that we were involved in. The Chinese on the other side, they have machine guns that you could carry. They were quite inaccurate, but they spit out 40 rounds in seconds. And you darn sure hit something with that firepower.
Did you have any close calls in combat?
No.
That's a blessing.
Thank God, no. I was in Company F, and next to us on the left was Company G. my company was not attacked, but G Company was attacked one night. And that's when the incident occurred with my box of hand grenades. And the next morning, a tank rolled by our positions. In the back of the hill was our kitchen, and you sat outside in the dirt with your tray for food. And I was sitting there eating my breakfast when this tank came by, and it was, the whole top of the tank was stacked with dead soldiers from Company F. And it just about let me lose my breakfast. The guys were packed in that tank like cordwood. But it's not a good sight at all. And while I was at the hospital, they x-rayed, they looked at everything, and they said, I don't know, maybe arthritis. No? Anyway, I said, I have lost my glasses, and while I'm here, is there a department for eye care and glasses? Oh yeah, we have that here. Well, let me go by there and see if I can get a new pair of glasses. Examination by a sergeant who is perhaps an ophthalmologist or not. He looked, he said, I don't know. I want somebody else to look at this. Because the guy was a young lieutenant. Shook his head and said, no. Let me have the major look at this. Well, a major comes who looked to be a man in his early 60s. He looked, and he said, son, what's your medical profile? I said, I believe I'm a B, which B still makes you eligible for frontline duty. The major said, well, son, I don't think with these eyes of yours, you are not a B. You are at least a C. I said, okay. Then what? Well, you have to be transferred to the rear. And I'll sign for that. I said, thank you, sir. There I went off to a signal corps company in Yeongdong-po, Korea, which is a suburb of Seoul, and they put me in the motor pool. which was a fine place for me. And most of the work that had to be done had to be done at night, which was okay too. That all was fine. The company commander was a man in his 60s who most of the time wandered around drunk to the gills. He didn't want to be in Korea. He didn't want to be anything. He just wanted to survive. It was about 5 months later, I was walking around in Seoul. I had found a little Chinese restaurant and went to eat there, and then wandered down the street looking at the various buildings, stores, when an officer came walking towards me, and I said, I know this guy. And sure enough, it was Captain Notrod from basic training. I had to have my birth certificate translated into English. And Notrod was German, and he did the translation and signed his name for a good translation. And I have met him several times during the months. And there's Notrod walking towards me in Seoul, Korea. And he looks at me and he says, Karl, what are you doing here? Well, same question to you. Well, we were told to be here. But he said, hey, you had your basic training in the Ordnance Corps. What are you doing in the Signal Corps? I was told to be there. He said, oh, leave it to me. I'll have you back in the Ordnance Corps. I said, well, that's fine with me. No objection. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I get a message. You have been transferred to Signal Corps in Seoul, and you are to present yourself there. I did. Fine. What is the Ordnance Corps doing there? They're receiving vehicles that were damaged during combat or any action due to war. And we had to classify them according to whether they could be repaired in Korea or they had to be shipped to Japan for major rebuilding, or whether it was just plain junk. Most of what we got had to be shipped back to Japan. And right across the street from our location, there was a railhead. We had to transport the vehicles over there and get them loaded on the flatbed cars to be shipped to Japan. And the first was the train trip down to Busan, the harbor. And it was an interesting job in a way, and a good one. Then it developed into something else. All of a sudden we got vehicles, jeeps mainly, and some staff cars. Staff cars that were rather old. World War II vintage. Chryslers and Chevrolets, a few Fords. They were just plain too old. And mixed in with that were a few Jeeps that were in rough condition. And that became our used car lot. And civilian Koreans could come, look at the vehicles, and make a bid for one or two, and maybe they would get the bid or they wouldn't. Well, it was people from Korean engineering companies looking for transportation for some of their people. And son of a gun, we sold those old staff cars for $10,000 a piece. Amazing. Jeeps that wouldn't even start brought $5,000. It was amazing.
Wow.
And then came the day when I was advised that there was no longer the 5-year citizenship requirement. Now you could apply for citizenship after 3 months of military service. So I immediately jumped on that and filled out the paperwork necessary to send to Washington. And 1 month before my service time was up in Korea, and I was to be rotated back to the States, there came a couple of people from Congress and from Immigration Service to Seoul, 8th Army Headquarters. A relatively quick examination of our knowledge of the American government. There were about 35 other guys in the same shoes as mine. And we all passed and were properly sworn in as citizens of the United States of America. And I tell you, I have that certificate that identifies me as an American in Seoul, Korea.
That's funny.
And it was really one of my proudest days when I earned that. When I got back to my company, the company commander was standing at the gate. He apparently had found out, and he said, "PFC Stenzel, I am so happy to congratulate you. I'm becoming a real American. I said, thank you, sir. He said, moreover, now you can become an officer in the United States Army. I said, sorry, sir. Next month, I will become a civilian again. And I think I'm gonna stay a civilian. But thank you.
That's great.
And that's the end of the story.
Well, thank you for your service overseas and fighting in Korea.
Well, I appreciate that. But it was not my doing. I just did what I was commanded to do.
Wow.
And that's typically the excuse of military people, especially ones in Germany who did wrong, who all said, I was only following commands. It was my decision that I did these things.